Hello, freak bitches. Isn't there also an issue with our incredibly limited ability to view reality itself? Because we're only viewing the dimensions that are relevant to us in this current state of carbon-based life form. This talking monkey clinging to the spaceship, flying through the universe. Right? This is what's important to us. But when you pay attention to the dudes who write on yellow legal pads and they get into quantum physics and they have all those crazy equations that nobody but them understands. Maybe you do. I look at that shit and I go, what the fuck are they writing? But they believe, I mean, what is the current model? They believe there's at least 11 dimensions. There perhaps could be more. What if there is a dimension that you can plug into that it's purely consciousness driven, meaning there's no physical experience, there's no touching the ground, there's no gravity, but you exist in a conscious state and it's perpetual. Like if you take a rocket ship and it gets past our gravity and shoots off into distant space and you have a clear shot of 14 billion years back to the beginning of the universe itself with nothing in the way, you're just going to keep going for 14 billion light years. You're just going to keep going. Like, what if there is a place that your consciousness can go to like that, where it's no longer burdened by biology, by the timeline of birth to death, by the limitations of the flesh, but consciousness itself can exist in some bizarre dimension that we just haven't access to.
So yeah, I mean, I think consciousness is probably just ultimately a physical process.
Why do you think that?
Ultimately because of conservation of energy. The reason being, there's this age-old philosophical debate between the monists and dualists. People who think, is consciousness just ultimately some sort of physical process? Or is it something special? So Descartes thought there was this pineal gland, this little bit of your brain, and your conscious kind of soul was just kind of steering your like monkey body through this pineal gland. But the question is just for why, I think the strongest argument about why that couldn't be right is it seems to be like it would have to be creating energy out of nowhere. And it seems to be just fixed law of the universe that just can't happen. Because in order for, this conscious mind to, if it's not merely a physical process, if it's not just the brain, in order for it to be able to affect what this physical entity is doing, it would have to use energy to be able to do that. So the energy would have to be coming from somewhere, and if it's not coming from just the physical realm, then suddenly we've got this counterexample to all the rest of science.
Sort of, but are you aware of the theories of human neurotransmitters being pathways to other dimensions, like dimethyltryptamine? Do you know about all that?
I mean, I know about DMT.
Do you know it's produced in the pineal gland? Where Descartes thought that all that stuff was going on, the seat of the soul, what the Egyptians called the eye of Horus, and the reason why the Catholics and so many ancient religions were so focused on pine cones in their art and their imagery. That's the pineal gland. That's the image of it. That's what it's supposed to represent. And for people who have had these intense transformative psychedelic experiences by consuming exogenous dimethyltryptamine, which is produced by the brain, that you have these insane transformative experiences where you feel like you are traveling to other dimensions.
Yeah, so I do want to say, like...
Have you done any of that?
I've never done DMT.
Oh,
no.
You son of a bitch. Why not? What are you doing? You're wasting your time.
I know, I'm such a good boy.
But it's something that's in the brain. I mean, it's a natural product of human biology.
I mean, whether it's natural or not isn't the question. Just, if I'm going to have a career based on my brain, I want to be very careful to
not break it?
To not break it, yeah.
Yeah, but it's one of the most transient drugs ever observed in the body. Your body brings it back to baseline in like 15 minutes.
Okay, is that, because there's a lot of, I do think there's like tons of, people very often greatly overestimate the risks of non-legal drugs like MDMA is like super safe and so on.
Overestimate the risks? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's
of MDMA? Yeah.
Yeah.
MDMA is weird, right? That's a weird one. It's not a natural drug. Dimethyltryptamine, I think the real concern would be psychological because what you face is so bizarre. Terence McKenna had the best quote about it. I think he said that you would risk death by astonishment. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Well,
it's so bizarre that it's almost a sin for a guy as smart as you to not experience it. But you just come right back, and you even when you're there, you're there. I mean, it's you. It's not like your consciousness dissolves into some bizarre quasi living state, and then you have to like work your way back to being you again.
Yeah.
No, you're Will MacAskill in the dimension, whatever the fuck it is. But what's crazy about it is that this is produced in the very area where Descartes was believing the seat of the soul is, and so many different Eastern religions and all this psychological, like all these different religions and all these different cultures, they were all convinced that one gland had some massive significance in terms of the spirit and the soul, whatever that means, whatever the spirit means.
So then the question is just, in these experiences, is it the case that you're like genuinely seeing into another dimension?
Right.
Or is it the case that you just have a new kind of perspective on consciousness? So one thing I do think is that in terms of conscious experience, there's the sort of conscious experiences that humans have access to. And I think that must just be 0.001% out of the entire landscape of possible conscious experiences. So if you imagine if you were a bat and you could echolocate, that's just a radically different conscious experience. I don't think that maps onto any sort of conscious experience that humans could have.
Have you seen people do that?
I know that
blind people.
Yeah,
blind people can do that. It's pretty amazing.
It is amazing.
Very effectively too. It's like shockingly effectively. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, but there's also human experiences that are available without drugs that some people have achieved through radical states of meditation and Kundalini yoga, where they could achieve natural psychedelic states. Holotropic breathing, people that have done that have experienced like really radical psychological transformations and incredible psychedelic experiences from that as well. Yeah,
and so I think like these sorts of experiences are very important, very interesting. And what they're, I said that maybe we experience 0.01% of all possible conscious experiences, and that just allows you to see a little bit more of this potential vast landscape. Whereas I think there's nothing unmagical about saying ultimately that's all explained in terms of physics, in terms of different sorts of neurons firing and different sorts of transmitters and so on. We don't need to say, and it's also this other thing which breaks all the known laws of physics that you're seeing into some other dimension in order for that to be an incredibly important thing. And nor is it unscientific to say we know almost nothing about consciousness. In terms of the areas of scientific inquiry, we have no understanding at all about the relationship between conscious experiences and what we would think of as physical processes. We really have no idea about, if you give me any sufficiently complicated physical processes which are conscious and which are not, all we can go on is really this, I'm conscious, and so I know that things that are kind of like me are probably conscious too. And that's the best we've got, really. And this is known as the hard problem of consciousness. And philosophers often say they've solved it with something, and I think it's always begging the question. I think we should be very open to the fact that just as in 3000 BC, people had no idea about the laws of physics. This was just completely unexplored territory. We should think contemporary science, this is just a big black gap in our scientific understanding. And perhaps it's something maybe 21st century science, maybe 22nd century science can really get to grips with.
Yeah, it does seem like the ultimate question. Like, what is it for? Why is it here? What controls it? Is it in the mind? Is it external? Is the brain just an antenna that tunes into consciousness? The dimethyltryptamine question is so bizarre because it's the most potent psychedelic drug known to man, and your brain makes it.
Yeah.
Like,
so
what's it in there for?
I don't know if this is a myth, but I've heard it's what gets made when you die.
Yeah, they believe that during high rates of stress where your body believes you're going to die, and when you're dreaming, when you're in heavy REM sleep, your body produces larger amounts of it than baseline. But they don't know. It's really difficult. They've only just now, within the last few years, the Cottonwood Research Foundation, which Dr. Rick Strassman has a big part of it. He's the guy who wrote the book DMT, the spirit molecule. He did a bunch of the first FDA-approved drug trials with civilians where they took people and they gave them a Schedule 1 drug, dimethyltryptamine, which is so crazy that it's a Schedule 1 drug that your body produces. But they gave it to people intravenously over the course of several months, and they documented all the different trips and all the different the different commonalities that these people had in their experiences. And he's working very closely with the Cottonwood Research Foundation. And one of the things that they found is that they've recently discovered, there was just anecdotal evidence that it was produced by the pineal gland. We knew that DMT was produced by the liver and the lungs, but now they know for sure because they've isolated it in rats. So in living rats, they know that they produce DMT with the pineal gland. So that explains a lot of ancient Eastern mysticism and all the symbology, all these symbols that people had to represent this gland. Now they know, okay, well, this gland definitely does produce this incredibly potent psychedelic drug. But now the question is, at what levels, during what periods of stress, like how do you have to bring someone to the point of death before they experience this? And if that is the case, is it possible that consciousness itself is something that we, since we haven't really figured out what exactly it is it possible that consciousness can travel through this chemical pathway, that maybe these intense dimethyltryptamine experiences are in fact a gateway to what people have assumed exists from the beginning of time, like an afterlife or a sea of souls or something, some stage of existence other than this physical existence that we all experience right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like I'd be...
Sounds like crazy talk, right?
It sounds pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's coming out of my mouth and I'm going, what the fuck are you talking about, dude?
I mean, I think I'd just be surprised if consciousness was just this one chemical. I think it's much more likely that it's this emergent phenomenon from this incredibly complex system of, billions of different neurons firing in a certain way. And when you have a certain process that's sufficiently complex in the right way, somehow, and this is just this big black box that we've got no idea about, somehow subjective experience comes out of that. But it would seem, I mean, otherwise the issue is you could have just DMT traveling in just a test tube or something and Petri dish. And it would seem like, is this Petri dish conscious? That would seem really strange.
Why would that be the case? If you're breathing air and the air keeps you alive, like you're breathing in and breathing out, you don't think that air carries the life with it to another place, right? Air is just a component of life.
Yeah.
It's something that your body requires.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's possible. Maybe it's the case. Though, again, I feel I'd be surprised if it was like this chemical is necessary for consciousness in some way.
I'm not saying it's necessary. But I am curious as to how consciousness varies. Consciousness and the actual feeling of being alive varies depending upon your health, depending upon stress levels, depending upon love and happiness, and all these different factors change the way you view the world, which is really interesting because in effect that changes consciousness. And you can be more, you can be more elevated. Like I guarantee you, all this effective altruism that you're concentrating on is somehow or another elevating your consciousness because you're putting out so much love and so much happiness, and you're helping so many people. There's so many positive benefits to your very existence. I've got to believe that somehow or another that manages to come back to you.
I mean, it definitely comes back to me in kind of how I feel about my life. I mean, when we were talking about how, money is just not the key to a happy life, the question is, well, what is? And the answers are having a great community, having a greater purpose in life, feeling like you're making a difference. So all of these reasons are why. So we've built up this kind of community around effective altruism. People all around the world who are making a significant change. So, for example, donating 10% of their income to the charities they think are most effective, or pursuing a career that they think is really effective. And one thing I wasn't surprising from the outset, but I'm so happy happened, is that this strong community has formed. It's kind of like a little global village or something. And people have found that actually, far from being a sacrifice, as you might have expected, this is actually incredibly rewarding because you've now got this community of people who have shared aims to you, and you're all working towards this greater goal. And that's something that I think is very lacking in the world today. So many people just... They work 9 to 5 and, they have a nice time on the weekend, but they're like, where is all of this going? At the end of my life, am I really going to think, yeah, I made the most of this? Whereas if you think at the end of your life, like, yep, I dedicated my life to helping others, and I had this transformative impact on thousands of people, you're not going to think at the end of your life, gee, I really wasted that.
Right.
It's just something I don't think you can really look at.
If you go deep, though, down the philosophical rabbit hole, and you really consider that life is this temporary experience, and even benefiting someone through this temporary experience is still a temporary experience. It's like you are helping someone. You gave them a pillow for the ride, and it's a temporary ride. The ride comes to an end, and then what? And then what is the point of all this? Like, what is the point of effective altruism if you're just helping people during this temporary ride that doesn't seem to mean anything?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. I like your eyebrow. It's really cool.
Can't help myself.
I can do that too.
Just raise up. I just go, what the fuck is this? Freak myself out. Well, we do get freaked out at this, when you think of
cosmic
existential angst.
Yeah. So
the angst of existence.
So I think there's two. I think there's two answers here.
Okay.
The first is that the ride is the goal.
Right.
Ultimately, again, if you think the purpose of life is to increase the amount of happiness and reduce the amount of suffering, the final goal is good experiences, and the kind of anti-goal is bad experiences. So when we're sitting here talking, having a great time, this is us kind of achieving. This is us getting points on the win counter.
Because we're having a good time.
That's right, yeah. If we were really hating this, then we'd be losing.
Well, even more so because we're broadcasting this live, and millions of people are going to hear it.
Yeah, and hopefully they're enjoying it.
Hopefully. And maybe if they're not, at least there's a little stress relief. Like maybe they're at the gym and they go, these fucking idiots. And they're doing squats and they're getting angry.
Yeah. So I think that's the first thing. But then the second thing is relates to this idea of cosmic significance, where what often motivates, so you say, oh, well, we're just along for a ride, we're all going to get eaten up by the sun eventually and so on. What's the kind of greater purpose of life? But I actually think there are some ways that our actions now can have much greater cosmic significance. And that's because I think if you think that the human race survives for the next few centuries, it seems kind of inevitable that we're going to spread to the stars. And I think that would be good. Again, from this perspective, and we can go into more arguments if you want, of just saying what we want to do is promote happiness and reduce suffering. If that means we can live on other planets as well and have kind of thriving civilizations there, not only where the people are having great lives, but also making scientific, artistic contributions and so on, then that's a good thing to do as well. Well, there's no technological reason for thinking that we won't be able to do that in the future, given current rates of technological progress, unless something really bad happens along the way. And this kind of gets back to one of the things we talked about right at the start, was one of the focus areas of the effective altruism community is on kind of trying to reduce risks of human extinction, of global catastrophic risks. These are the sorts of things that could imperil the human journey, as it were. And I think that if you're working to mitigate some of these things, then you're increasing the chance that we do get to the sort of level where humanity can have a thriving future, not just on this planet, but on other planets as well. And that actually means your actions really do have this huge cosmic significance.
So the conscious effort to be a kind person, a generous person, and effective altruism spreads and it impacts people. There's this ripple effect, and your good deeds could perhaps fuel enough people with this thought and with effective altruism, and more people might act on that to the point where we reduce the amount of suffering, to the point where we extend the lifespan of human beings, we extend the areas where we have no war, we reduce the amount of violence to the point where we can successfully innovate to the point where we can get off this planet.
That's right.
And then start from scratch with a new dictator on Mars. Donald Trump on Mars. How about that?
So I think that
Putin on Mars.
Well, if he could become president of Mars, I'd be pretty happy with that.
It'd be fascinating. We'd have to go to war with Mars.